In the summer of 1996, one man embarked on a frantic journey across North America, convinced he was running for his life. Just days later, he was found deceased in a Tennessee parking lot, surrounded by thousands of dollars in cash and gold that the perpetrator mysteriously left untouched. Authorities were baffled as this man had no known ties to Tennessee, and the way he arrived made as little sense as the way he died. Blair Adams was a 31-year-old construction foreman from Surrey, British Columbia in Canada. By all accounts, he was a hard worker. He had recently returned from a project in Germany and was well regarded in his job at his stepfather's construction company. Adams had battled the bottle in the past, but had been sober for 2 years. In early 1996, however, those close to him noticed alarming changes in his behavior. He abruptly quit his job without even collecting his last paycheck and began exhibiting paranoia and mood swings. He told his mother that people were spreading rumors about him and told friends that someone was trying to knock him off. By July of 1996, Blair Adams genuinely believed his life was in danger, whether the threat was real or imagined. On Friday, July 5, 1996, Blair Adams took drastic action. He withdrew nearly all the money from his bank account and emptied his safe deposit box of cash, gold, and jewelry. With this small fortune on hand, he abruptly left Canada, convinced he had to escape whoever he feared. That same day, Adams tried to enter the United States by car ferry from Victoria, British Columbia to Seattle. His plan immediately hit a snag. As a lone man carrying a large amount of cash, Adams drew suspicion from U.S. immigration officials, who feared he might be doing something illicit. When they discovered his past minor criminal charges for possession of a controlled substance, they denied him entry at the border. Adams was turned back, thwarting his first attempt to flee Canada. Over the next few days, Blair Adams grew only more desperate. On July 8th, he avoided his own apartment and stayed with his mother, refusing to say exactly what was wrong, but remaining convinced someone wanted him dead. That day, he even bought an expensive round-trip plane ticket to Frankfurt, Germany, possibly to visit a girlfriend he had met while working there, only to cancel it later the same day. His erratic planning suggested he couldn't decide where to run. He seemed to be grasping at any escape route. In the early hours of July 9th, Adams tried once more to cross into the U.S., this time on foot via the Pacific Highway border crossing from British Columbia into Washington state. Border agents noticed that Blair had fresh scratches on his hands and legs, and that he oddly matched the description of a man linked to a recently stolen car found nearby. They briefly detained him, suspecting he might be the car thief, but with no hard evidence, they had to let him go. Once again, Blair Adams was back on Canadian soil, but not for long. Determined to get away, Adams quickly devised a new plan. He drove his own car to the Vancouver airport and left it there, renting a Nissan Altima to make another attempt at the border. This third try was successful. Later on July 9th, Adams finally managed to slip into the United States by car and headed to Seattle. Upon arriving at Seattle-Tacoma International Airport, his movements became even more puzzling. He abandoned the rental car at the airport and purchased an overnight one-way plane ticket to the nation's capital. It was a costly and illogical choice. Adams paid more, specifically for a one-way ticket, when agents advised him he could get a cheaper round-trip ticket. Why he chose Washington, D.C., and why he didn't simply fly directly somewhere closer to his perceived safe haven remains unclear. Some have speculated that this bizarre pattern of travel was intended to show off the forces that he perceived to be trailing him. What is clear is that early on July 10th, Blair Adams landed at Dulles International Airport and immediately rented a Toyota Camry for a long road trip. After renting the car, Adams set off driving with no one really knowing his ultimate destination. By that evening, July 10th, 1996, he had traveled about 500 miles southwest to East Tennessee. Around 5:30 p.m., Blair Adams turned up at a gas station off Interstate 40 in the Strawberry Plains area just outside Knoxville. Here he encountered yet another bizarre hurdle. Adams told the gas station staff that he couldn't start his car, believing the key wasn't working. A repair service employee responded to the call for help, and he quickly discovered the simple problem. Blair was using the wrong key for the car. Adams had accidentally grabbed the Nissan key from his previous rental and was trying to use it on the Toyota Camry he was now driving. The employee later recalled that Blair appeared completely confused and irrationally insisted that he had the right key even when it clearly didn't fit. Unable to persuade Adams to simply check his pockets for the correct car key, the employee arranged for the Camry to be towed to a repair shop. He then gave Blair Adams a lift to a nearby motel called the Fairfield Inn. It was now about 7 o'clock at night on July 10th, and Adams had nowhere to go until his car could be sorted out the next day. At the Fairfield Inn, Blair's nervous, erratic behavior continued. He paid $100 cash for a room and even left a $50 deposit for the key. But oddly, he walked away without waiting to get his change back. Over the next 40 minutes, surveillance cameras captured him entering and exiting the hotel lobby 5 separate times before finally heading out of the building for good. According to a hotel employee, Adams appeared paranoid and kept looking over his shoulder, as if expecting someone to follow him or show up any moment. He never actually went to the room he'd purchased, and by 7:30 that evening, Blair Adams walked out of the Fairfield Inn's front door for the last time, never to return. What Adams did during the overnight hours of July 10th into July 11th is one of the lingering mysteries of this case. With his car in the shop and his hotel room unused, he was essentially stranded on foot in an unfamiliar city. There were a couple of unconfirmed sightings later that night. Employees at a nearby truck stop claimed they saw a man matching Adams's description around 10 that night. He was reportedly talking to another man about Canadian currency, which strongly bolsters the potential that it was him. 2 women also reported seeing him chatting with an unidentified man outside a Cracker Barrel restaurant adjacent to his motel. These leads never panned out, and the descriptions of the mysterious man varied, so investigators couldn't be sure of anything. It wasn't entirely clear if these sightings were Blair, and it wasn't clear either if he was sighted with the same man each time. Notably, a forensic sketch of the man seen with Blair was produced, but this sketch produced no results. Personally, I think this sketch actually looks a lot like Blair himself, if he was in a fairly bad state, and I've put their pictures up side by side for comparison. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and feel free to tell me I'm totally off base, since I'm awful with face comparisons. What is known is that at some point that night, Adams got a meal from somewhere because an autopsy later found he had eaten lettuce, meat, and shrimp not long before he died. But beyond those scant clues, Blair Adams's movements in his final hours remain uncertain. Early the next morning, on July 11th, 1996, the tragic culmination of Blair's odyssey came to light. At about 7:30 that morning, a pair of construction workers arrived at their job site and stumbled upon a disturbing sight. Initially, they noticed what looked like a man lying on the ground in the parking lot and assumed he might be a homeless person sleeping there. As they got closer, it became clear the man wasn't asleep at all. He was dead, and the scene was anything but ordinary. The lifeless body was indeed Blair Adams, and he was stripped from the waist down. His pants had been pulled off and lay inside out near his body, along with his socks and shoes. One of his shoes was oddly propped beneath his head, almost like a makeshift pillow, as if someone had placed it there while he was dying. Scattered all around Blair Adams' body was a small fortune in cash. The workers and police who soon arrived found roughly $4,000 in American, Canadian, and German cash in the pockets of his jeans. Nearby was an open fanny pack containing small gold bars, gold and platinum coins, jewelry, and various other valuables Adams had been carrying. Astonishingly, it appeared that nothing had been taken. Whatever happened to Blair that night clearly was not a simple robbery. The rental car's missing key, the one Blair had insisted he couldn't find at the gas station, turned up lying on the ground close to his body, as did the key card for his unused hotel room. It was as if someone had dumped out the contents of his pockets after ending his life, yet chose not to steal a thing. Investigators processed the scene and the body, uncovering more grim details, and found that Blair Adams had been viciously attacked. He had sustained numerous cuts, abrasions, and bruises, and one of his hands was deeply gashed and blackened, as if it had been slammed into the pavement during a struggle. Tufts of his hair had been ripped out, indicating a fierce fight for his life. A later autopsy determined that the fatal blow was a violent impact to his abdomen, and his stomach was ruptured, causing internal bleeding and deadly septic shock. Investigators believe this massive abdominal trauma could have been caused by a very hard kick or even being struck by a vehicle's bumper. Blair also suffered a severe wound to his forehead, likely from a blunt instrument such as a crowbar or club. Certain injuries suggested a possible indecent assault, though the police were never able to recover any biological evidence to prove this. The investigation into Blair Adams's slaying turned up bizarre clues but few solid answers. One perplexing piece of evidence was literally in Blair's hand. Clenched in his fist was a single long strand of hair. The hair didn't appear to be Blair's own, strongly raising the possibility that it came from his attacker during the struggle. Unfortunately, aside from that lone hair, no other DNA or forensic evidence was found at the scene that could identify the perpetrator. It's unclear whether this hair was preserved, since it's theoretically possible that this hair may be able to yield a DNA profile when it wasn't able to in 1996 with the forensic technology then. Police scoured the construction site for a weapon, even testing pieces of metal rebar lying around, but nothing could be definitively linked to the crime. The case had no eyewitnesses to the attack itself. The closest thing to a witness was a security guard at a business nearby, who reported hearing a short, sharp scream around 3:30 on the night of the attack. The guard initially thought it sounded like a woman's scream, and simply went about his business without alerting anyone at the time. As detectives dug into Blair Adams' background and movements, they grew increasingly puzzled. Here was a man far from home, with no clear reason to be in Knoxville. He didn't know anyone in the area and had made no contact with friends or family during his journey. Investigators retraced his steps using receipts and tickets found in Blair's duffel bag at the scene, confirming the odd path he took from Canada to Tennessee. They interviewed his friends and family back in Canada, who uniformly said Blair was not involved in anything illegal. In fact, despite Blair's own fear that someone was after him, authorities began to suspect that this threat might have been largely a product of his own mental state. By all indications, Blair Adams was suffering from paranoia and delusions in the weeks before his death. Tragically, despite appearing to suffer from a mental break, he did end up encountering real deadly danger. Without a clear suspect, several theories have emerged about what might have happened to Blair Adams. One theory favored by the authorities revolves around an indecent assault, which escalated into Blair being attacked. Blair was likely in the midst of psychosis at the time, and was processing everything through this delusional framework. It's believed that some miscommunication may have occurred leading to violence. Another theory is that Blair Adams fell victim to a random act of violence. Some have speculated about a robbery attempt gone bad. Maybe Blair fought back fiercely, and the attacker panicked and fled without taking the money. The single scream heard at 3:30 in the morning lends credence to a sudden, swift altercation. That said, like all the other theories of the case, there's simply not enough to prove anything. The story of Blair Adams is as haunting as it is baffling. He left behind a trail of clues, from his frantic cross-country movements to the eerie crime scene littered with cash and gold, yet none of it adds up to a coherent answer. The sheriff's office continues to classify the 1996 attack on Blair Adams as an active cold case, holding out hope that new information might one day provide a breakthrough. On a late September afternoon in 1971, 16-year-old Kathy Moulton stepped out of a downtown music shop in Portland, Maine, never imagining it would be the last time anyone saw her. She had promised to be home by 6 that Friday, but Kathy never walked through the door. Her sudden disappearance from a busy Portland street sparked a mystery that has endured for decades. On Friday, September 24th, 1971, Kathy's father dropped her off in downtown Portland so she could run a few errands before a dance that night. She needed to pick up some last-minute items for her outfit. Her father left her on Forest Avenue around 3:30 p.m., and she promised to be home for dinner time. Kathy bought her supplies at a department store and stopped by a music store to visit a friend. Sometime after 5 o'clock, she left the music shop with her shopping bag and a brown leather purse from her recent birthday. That would be the last time anyone was confirmed to see her alive, though there would be disturbing reports about her whereabouts later. When Kathy didn't come home on time, her parents immediately knew something was wrong. She was always punctual, so their concern grew quickly. Her father drove around searching the streets, while her mother frantically called friends and classmates. By nightfall, with no sign of Kathy, the Moultons contacted Portland police, and I bet you might be able to guess what happened next. Police initially brushed them off, suggesting Kathy was probably a runaway, and it was too soon to file a report. The distraught parents had to return the next day to get an official missing person report filed. Even then, the case received little attention. A short newspaper item yielded no clues, and police had no idea what happened to Kathy. It's unclear what sort of actual investigation was undertaken by the authorities in this initial disappearance period, if anything. Meanwhile, the family launched their own search. The Moultons hired a private detective and followed every possible tip. They even drove to northern Maine and into New Brunswick, Canada, after alleged sightings of Kathy, but all of these leads ended in disappointment. Nearly 24 years passed with no answers, and in 1995, a Portland police detective named Kevin Cady reopened Kathy's cold case. He soon uncovered evidence that Kathy hadn't run away at all. Cady found that Kathy had been secretly dating a 22-year-old man, Lester Everett, and witnesses confirmed that on the day she vanished, she got into a blue Cadillac with Everett. There was also another young man in the vehicle with the two. The other passenger was a Canadian hitchhiker Everett had offered to drive home to the Tobique First Nation Reserve in New Brunswick, a long trip Kathy probably hadn't expected. Cady traced their route north, and records showed Everett had stolen a car and driven toward Canada on September 24th. In Fort Fairfield, Maine, near the border, a mechanic remembered servicing that car and noticing a quiet teenage girl traveling with two young men. The mechanic even recalled the Canadian man gripping the girl's neck to keep her from wandering, a chilling sign that Kathy was being held against her will. Why this mechanic didn't decide to report this incident at the time is beyond me. Further investigation revealed that Everett and his companion spent some time picking potatoes at a farm in Aroostook County, Maine, after leaving Portland. A woman who was at that farm in 1971 remembered a timid girl named Candy with them, a girl who cried often, stayed apart from others, and said she wanted to go home. It became clear that Candy was Kathy using a false name, frightened and desperate to escape. One night during the harvest, Everett left the farm with Kathy and returned without her. Investigators believe he took her to the Tobique Reservation in Canada and left her there with the other man, though this has never been proven. Soon after, Everett fled Maine. He eventually died in 1986, never revealing anything about Kathy's fate. That left the Canadian acquaintance as likely the last known person to see Kathy. When authorities tracked him down years later, he refused to talk, even when offered immunity. In 1996, a grand jury reviewed the case, but there was not enough evidence to charge anyone. Detectives, however, are convinced that Kathy was slain on the Tobique Reservation fairly soon after she disappeared. Kathy Moulton's disappearance remains one of Maine's oldest unsolved cases. Her father passed away in 2017 without ever learning the truth, but her mother and sisters continue to hope for closure. Hey everyone, it's Jimmy here, taking a quick moment to jump in to remind you to like and subscribe and to hit the notification bell. Also, don't forget to check out the YouTube membership or the Patreon if you want to support my channel further. Just a week before Christmas in 1993, a brutal crime shook San Francisco's Chinatown. In a scene fit for a movie, 42-year-old Jian Fang, a successful noodle factory owner, was ambushed inside his own van late at night. By the end of the night, Jian Fang would lay deceased, with a cheap kitchen knife plunged through his heart, and rumors would soon swirl that he was more than a noodle factory owner. Jian Fang was a prosperous businessman who owned 2 noodle factories supplying dozens of restaurants in Chinatown. He was a hard-working entrepreneur who even personally collected daily cash payments from his restaurant clients, a routine that later raised eyebrows. At 42, he was at the peak of his career and well respected in the community, which made his violent death all the more shocking. On December 18, 1993, Fang worked late at one of his noodle factories. Around midnight, he offered a ride home to his supervisor, Miss Yi Sung. Unbeknownst to them, the van's rear window had been shattered, and 2 attackers were hiding in the back unnoticed. Within moments of driving away, 2 young men rose from the back and began yelling for the money, clearly believing Fang had a large sum on him. One attacker struck Yi on the head with a pistol, ordering her not to look at them. The other thrust a knife at Fang and demanded cash. The assailants tore through the van, rifling through boxes and compartments as they shouted their demands. Yi recalled that the ordeal lasted more than half an hour, far longer than a typical robbery. It seemed the attackers were convinced a hidden fortune was inside and grew frustrated when they couldn't find it. Eventually, Fang attempted to disarm the knife-wielding man. In that instant, the attacker drove the blade directly into Fang's heart. Fang collapsed, mortally wounded, and the thieves grabbed the scant money available, just under $100, and fled into the darkness. Paralyzed by fear and the criminal's threats, Mrs. Yi stayed in the van for roughly 2 hours before finally seeking help. When police arrived, they found a grim scene. Jian Fang was dead from a single stab wound. The van's rear window was broken out, and the interior was a shambles. The weapon, an old low-quality steak knife, had been left behind, as was the fake pistol used to bludgeon Yi. No fingerprints or DNA were recoverable, suggesting the 2 attackers likely wore gloves. Miss Yi could only describe the attackers as 2 young Asian men who spoke Cantonese fluently. With scant evidence and only that limited description, investigators had little to go on. 3 weeks after the slaying, a surprising tip jolted the case. An anonymous caller claimed Fang's death was tied to gambling rather than a random robbery. According to this informant, Jian Fang was an avid sports gambler with connections in a betting network. On the day he died, he had supposedly collected about $25,000 in cash from gambling wins. If true, the assailants may have been after far more than his nightly business receipts. The cops pursued this lead, but nothing could be confirmed, and no evidence of a huge cash pickup or secret gambling stash was found. The tantalizing tip led nowhere, and the case remained cold. At present, there are a number of theories that have all been investigated thoroughly by the cops. A prevalent theory is that Fang's slaying was rooted in his alleged illegal gambling activities. The tip about a $25,000 windfall suggests the perpetrators might have been after a big payout related to a sports bet. I'm probably not going to shock anyone here, but if Jian Fang was a hardcore gambler, he may have been in debt. Perhaps Fang had won that large wager, and someone decided to steal those winnings to pay back a debt that was already pre-existing. In the realm of underground gambling, debts and disputes are often settled outside the law, sometimes with violence. Under this theory, the intent going into the attack wasn't to eliminate Fang. These were two heavies sent on a debt collection mission against a non-violent target. This may explain why the two men were carrying a toy gun and a small cheap knife respectively. Only when Fang attempted to fight back did the man with the knife stab him through the chest, perhaps unintentionally as part of the scuffle. Under this theory, the slaying was essentially a debt collection gone very wrong. The two individuals sent to collect the debt too may have ended up eliminated as loose ends, since it couldn't be certain if the witness saw them. Another theory claims that the crime was a botched robbery by inexperienced criminals. It's possible some young gang members had observed Fang's cash collection routine and saw him as an easy target. They likely assumed he would have a large amount of cash on him, and were surprised to find almost nothing. In this view, the plan was a bold but clumsy cash grab that escalated into something much worse when Fang resisted. A much more controversial idea is the allegation that someone with inside knowledge was involved. Observers note that Yi was left alive and essentially unharmed, and they find her 2-hour delay in calling for help puzzling. Some wonder if she might have tipped off the robbers or known about a big cash haul. There's no hard evidence to implicate Yi in any wrongdoing, and police have not treated her as a suspect. Still, the peculiar circumstances have led to unproven speculation that the assailants had inside information about Fang's activities. Another theory is that the whole robbery was just a cover for a hit, and that the assailants wanted Yi to live since she could convey the story about a robbery gone wrong. Again, there's nothing specifically out there to support this theory, though it remains an intriguing possibility. Despite extensive investigation and these various theories, the attack on Jian Fang remains unsolved. The case was featured on Unsolved Mysteries in 1995, drawing national attention at the time, and my own attention decades later. This appearance led to numerous tips, but nothing ever materialized into a solid lead. It started with a single photograph that seemed to capture the impossible. Tiny, delicate fairies dancing in broad daylight around a young girl at the bottom of an English garden. In the summer of 1917, 9-year-old Frances Griffiths and her 16-year-old cousin, Elsie Wright, staged this otherworldly scene by a stream in Cottingley, Yorkshire. The resulting image, showing Frances with several winged, fairy-like figures, looked so enchanting and convincing that it would soon spark a sensation. What began as a private prank between two mischievous cousins quickly spiraled into one of the most famous hoaxes of the 20th century. This hoax would eventually rope in eminent figures like Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the creator of Sherlock Holmes. Francis and Elsie often played by a garden brook in Cottingley and claimed that real fairies lived there. In mid-1917, to prove their story, the cousins borrowed Elsie's father's camera and snapped 2 photographs that appeared to show them interacting with tiny winged beings. One image featured Francis posed with several dancing fairies, and another showed Elsie holding out her hand to a small creature. Elsie's father, Arthur Wright, was an avid photographer and immediately suspected trickery. He knew his daughter's artistic talent and figured they must have used cardboard cutouts. Arthur was so sure it was a prank that he refused to lend them his camera again. And yeah, I'm just going to say here that Arthur sounds like a total stick in the mud. Elsie's mother, Polly, however, found the pictures charming and wondered if they might be genuine evidence of the supernatural. For 2 years, the fairy photographs remained a local curiosity. The turning point came in mid-1919 when Polly Wright took the images to a meeting of the Theosophical Society in nearby Bradford. The topic that evening was fairy life, a subject perfectly suited to the photographs. The images captivated members of the society, including leading theosophist Edward Gardner. Gardner, eager to find proof of mystical and spiritual phenomena, saw the Cottingley pictures as timely evidence supporting the society's belief in a world beyond the ordinary. A photographic expert examined the prints and concluded that the photos showed no signs of tampering. This expert could confirm only that the images weren't double exposures or darkroom tricks, but he stopped short of declaring they had actually caught fairies on film. Encouraged by these assessments and not caring for the nuance, Gardner began using the fairy photos in lectures and even sold prints of them to fascinated audiences. The photographs soon appeared in a spiritualist magazine, which is where they caught the eye of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. He was not only a famed author, but also a devoted spiritualist, deeply interested in life beyond the veil of death. By 1920, Britain knew him as an outspoken believer in psychic phenomena, and he was in the midst of writing an article about fairies for the Christmas issue of a popular magazine. Overjoyed at this apparent proof of fairy folk, Conan Doyle reached out to the Wright family to obtain permission to publish the Cottingley photographs. And just to give some context here, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle was basically the Fox Mulder of the time. The man wanted to believe. Conan Doyle's endorsement launched the Cottingley fairies into international fame, and when the magazine published the photos in December 1920, the issue sold out within days. Public reaction was decidedly mixed. Many people were enchanted by this apparent proof of a hidden magical realm, praising the girl's innocence, but skeptics immediately suspected a hoax. Sharp-eyed critics noted that the fairy figures looked suspiciously like magazine illustrations and suggested the photos were nothing more than cut-out drawings. Nonetheless, the fairy fever was infectious for those who wanted to believe. Even those who doubted the photos couldn't readily explain how 2 kids with a simple box camera had produced them. For many, it felt easier, and certainly more delightful, to accept that perhaps fairies were real than to believe that photographs, a trusted medium at the time, could lie. The timing was also perfect. The nation, reeling from conflict, was eager for an innocent escape from grief and loss, so a tale of fairies found a receptive audience. At Conan Doyle's urging, Francis and Elsie produced 3 more fairy photographs in 1920, and he even compiled the story and pictures into a book. The long-awaited confession came in 1983, a full 66 years after the first prank photo was taken. By then, Elsie Wright was in her 80s, and finally ready to set the record straight. She and Francis co-authored an article admitting that the fairy photographs had been clever fakes, though they claimed that they had indeed interacted with fairies as children. The cousins revealed exactly how they did it. Back in 1917, Elsie had copied drawings of dancing fairies from a popular children's book of the time. They also traced pictures of princesses and drew wings on them to make them into fairies. The girls cut out these fairy figures, propped them up with hat pins in the grass, then took the magical-looking photographs before disposing of the paper props in the stream. In short, there were no tiny supernatural beings, just artfully arranged cardboard illustrations discarded in a questionable manner. When asked why they hadn't confessed sooner, Elsie and Francis admitted that they were embarrassed to tell the truth. In essence, so many prominent people had believed in them. As Elsie put it later, they were just two village kids who didn't dare contradict Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, so they kept quiet. Francis similarly said they never imagined the prank would be taken so seriously. It was merely a bit of fun that got out of hand. She also believed people were fooled simply because they wanted to be, and what was intended to be a brief trick to their parents became a worldwide sensation. Despite the obvious mystery being solved, there's something perhaps more meaningful below the surface. Why people were so willing to accept these fairies as real. One major factor was the cultural mood of the time. In the aftermath of the great conflict of all time, grieving and disillusioned people were longing for hope, innocence, and reassurance that unseen wonders might still exist. The fairies of Cottingley offered a welcome escape, a comforting hint that perhaps magic was real, just when the world needed something to believe in. Another reason the hoax took hold was the perceived credibility of the sources and technology involved. Photography was still a technical craft in the early 20th century, and many assumed that children couldn't fake something like this. Further, multiple photographic experts analyzed the stills over the year and confirmed that the early-day equivalent of Photoshop wasn't used. If experts and eminent thinkers believed the photographs were genuine, then that was good enough to accept the possibility that they were. It was a mild spring Saturday in 2001 when 17-year-old Adam Lake headed out to a house party just 2 blocks from his home in Hilliard, Ohio. He told his family he'd be back later that night, but he never returned. In a suburban neighborhood where nothing dramatic ever seemed to happen, Adam's sudden vanishing left everyone grasping for answers. Adam Lake was an ordinary Ohio teen in many respects, though he had run into his share of trouble. He lived with his mother and had recently faced a typical teenage setback. He'd been expelled from school for an extremely minor infraction. It turns out Adam had been caught puffing some street cabbage, which was apparently an offense deemed worthy of expulsion at the time. Despite this, he planned to earn his GED and hoped to enroll at Ohio State University that fall. One important fact was that Adam suffered from Crohn's disease, a chronic illness that can be life-threatening without proper medical care. He needed regular treatment, which made his disappearance especially concerning. On the evening of March 24, 2001, Adam had dinner at home, then left around 8:30 to attend a small party in the neighborhood. The gathering was only a couple of blocks away, an easy walk. Adam headed out with a friend, wearing a t-shirt, khaki pants, and a long black leather trench coat, and he took along a backpack and his cell phone. By all accounts, the party was uneventful, though some witnesses later said Adam seemed agitated or upset that night. What happened afterward remains a mystery, and at some point during or after the party, Adam vanished. He never made it back to his mother's house, and no one has reported seeing him since. When Adam failed to come home, his family reported him missing. Police opened a case, but from the start they leaned toward the idea that Adam had run away by choice. The case was classified as an endangered runaway. This means authorities believed Adam's disappearance was likely voluntary, but that he could be at risk due to his age or medical condition. Investigators even suggested he might have left the state on his own. Despite searches of the area and interviews with everyone at the party, no trace of Adam was found. Missing person flyers were distributed locally, and Adam's information was entered into national databases, but no tips materialized. Unusually, the police bulletin advised that caution should be used if approaching Adam, and noted he might need medical attention. This cryptic warning hinted that authorities had specific concerns about his intentions. It later emerged that early in the investigation, officers received a disturbing but unsubstantiated rumor about Adam's plans. According to Adam's sister, a false tip was circulating that he intended to carry out a violent act on the upcoming 2-year anniversary of Columbine. This bizarre claim led police to treat Adam as a potential threat, rather than a victim at first. Notably, Adam's habit of wearing a black trench coat may have fueled these fears. You see, there was something of a mass hysteria over trench coat-wearing young men at the time, though that's a story for another segment in another video. By the time the anniversary passed, the copycat theory had collapsed, and the valuable time had been permanently squandered. Adam's family never accepted the runaway theory. They knew he had left that night with no extra clothes or money, and fully expected to return home. He was close to his mother and would not have deliberately avoided contact for so many years. His reliance on medication for Crohn's disease was another red flag. If Adam were living on his own somewhere, sooner or later he would have needed treatment. Yet no such evidence ever surfaced. To his loved ones, the only reasonable explanation was that something bad happened to him that night. With the runaway idea in serious doubt, attention turned to other possibilities. Some have speculated that Adam could have had an accident or medical emergency while walking home. However, searches of the neighborhood and nearby areas found no sign of him, making an accident seem unlikely. The prevailing theory is that Adam encountered foul play either at the party or after he left. Perhaps an argument or altercation occurred at the gathering that led to violence, or maybe Adam left upset and crossed paths with someone dangerous on the short walk home. It's possible a person at the party knows more than they have said, or that a stranger abducted him in a moment of opportunity. Notably, Adam's backpack and phone have never been recovered, suggesting they disappeared with him. Unfortunately, there is no concrete evidence to support any single scenario. Various leads over the years have been checked, but everyone has led nowhere, and Adam remains missing. More than 24 years have now passed since Adam Lake disappeared, and his fate is still unknown. Investigators continue to keep his case open, and his information remains in national missing persons databases. Age-progressed images have been released to show what he might look like as an adult in his 30s or 40s. Today, Adam would be 42 years old, and until new evidence comes to light, the disappearance remains a haunting mystery without any sense of closure. On a snowy January night in 1988, 19-year-old Sue Swedell stepped into a stranger's car and vanished. Susan Swedell was a 19-year-old from Lake Elmo, Minnesota. She loved singing in her church choir and performing in school plays, and her friends remembered her as friendly and kind, but a bit naive and overly trusting. After a short time at college, she moved back home, and by 1988 was working 2 part-time jobs, one at a boutique and one at Kmart. She lived with her mother, Kathy, and her younger sister, 16-year-old Christine. The family were very close, and in fact, on January 19, 1988, Susan was looking forward to a quiet movie night with her mom and sister, plans that would tragically be derailed. That night, a blizzard swept through the area. Susan left work at about 9 a.m., calling home to say she'd drive straight back and asking which route was safest in the storm. Oddly, she had changed out of her red Kmart uniform before leaving and put on a light sweater and skirt, which was hardly proper attire for a winter snowstorm. A coworker commented on her outfit, but Susan waved it off because she was going to drive home anyway and wouldn't be outside at all. Notably, there have been suggestions that this outfit change indicated that she was going to meet someone that night, but this remains unproven. Further, as you're about to see, something sinister was at play even before she left work. Driving her maroon 1975 Oldsmobile Cutlass, Susan headed toward home, about 6 miles away, on slippery roads. Roughly 1 mile from her house, the Oldsmobile began to overheat. Around 9:30 p.m., she pulled into a gas station to deal with the problem. According to the recollection from the attendant the next day, almost immediately after, a light-colored older model car pulled in behind her. The driver of that car was described as a tall, well-built young man with shoulder-length sandy brown hair, wearing a leather jacket and a knit winter hat. Susan spoke with this unknown man outside. She then went into the station and told the attendant her car was overheating, asking if she could leave it there overnight. The clerk agreed, and Susan moved her disabled car to the side of the lot, then walked back out and got into the stranger's car. The man drove off with her into the snowy darkness, heading in the direction of her home. That was the last confirmed sighting of Susan Swedell. When Susan didn't arrive home, her mother and sister knew something was wrong. By 11 p.m., they phoned police for help, fearing she might have had an accident in the blizzard. Deputies soon found her maroon car abandoned at the gas station, but Susan was nowhere to be found. Inside the car, they found her purse, driver's license, and eyeglasses, crucial items she would never normally leave behind. At first, officers wondered if she had tried to walk home through the storm, and they searched the ditches along her route that night, but no trace of her turned up. The next day, after the gas station attendant revealed that Susan left with an unknown man, the case turned from a missing person search into a suspected abduction. There were no surveillance cameras at the station in 1988, leaving investigators with few leads. A few days later, an important clue emerged. Susan's mother had the Oldsmobile towed home, and when she tried to start it, the car overheated again. A mechanic then discovered that the radiator's valve had been loosened, allowing the coolant to leak out. In other words, the car's breakdown had been deliberately caused. This supported a disturbing theory. Someone might have sabotaged Susan's car to force a breakdown, then followed her and pretended to quote-unquote rescue her at the opportune moment. About a week after Susan vanished, the Swedell family experienced a bizarre incident at their house. Christine came home from school and noticed their spare house key, normally hidden in a specific spot, was missing. She eventually located the key and entered, only to find dirty dishes in the sink and a sweet, smoky odor in the air, clear signs that someone had been inside. That night, they also discovered the red pantsuit Susan had worn to work hidden under Susan's own bed, even though that uniform had been left at Kmart the day she disappeared. It seemed an unknown person had been in the house while they were out. The evidence strongly suggests Susan was the victim of a planned abduction. The sabotage of her car and the timing of the quote-unquote Good Samaritan indicate her breakdown was orchestrated by her abductor. Despite a composite sketch and description, this man has never been identified. Police did look at people close to Susan, and her ex-boyfriend was questioned and cleared early on. Co-workers noted Susan received frequent phone calls from an unknown man, but he was never traced. Picture a moonlit night in the highlands of Kenya, where a distant roar suddenly cuts through the silence. Villagers huddle closer to their campfire as an elder lowers his voice to warn of a creature lurking just beyond the flickering light. They call it the Nandi bear, a beast as fearsome as it is mysterious. Its legend has stalked these hills for generations, leaving behind stories as chilling as the darkness itself. The Nandi bear, named after the Nandi people of Western Kenya, is one of East Africa's most infamous legendary creatures. In local folklore, it is described as a massive, shaggy predator with the build of a bear and the sloping back of a hyena. Standing around 4 feet tall at the shoulder, it supposedly prowls after dusk, attacking livestock and unwary people with brutal ferocity. Known by local names, which generally translate as devil in different communities, the Nandi bear has long been a nocturnal terror in regional lore. Outsiders first caught wind of the Nandi bear in the early 1900s, when British explorers and settlers in East Africa began reporting encounters with an unknown animal. In 1905, for example, an adventurer wrote of seeing a bulky, dark creature about 5 feet high, crouching on its haunches like a great ape or bear. Before he could get a closer look, the beast bounded off into the forest on all fours. Over the next few years, similar accounts emerged. One pair of settlers described a beast rising from the tall grass, which they at first assumed was a lioness, until a side view revealed a massive, snouted head and a steeply sloping back. The creature shuffled off with a bear-like trot, convincing them it was something unknown to science. Yet for all the excitement and fear it stirred, no one ever captured or shot a specimen of the Nandi bear. Hunters scoured the highland forests with rifles and traps, but came back empty-handed. Not a single carcass, photograph, or clear piece of evidence was ever produced. As the decades passed and the once dense forests were gradually settled and farmed, sightings of the monster grew ever rarer. By the mid-20th century, they had all but ceased. Many scientists and skeptics came to believe that the Nandi bear was never a unique species at all, but rather a case of mistaken identity bolstered by eerie folklore. The most likely culprit, they argued, was the spotted hyena. Hyenas have high shoulders and sloping backs, just as the legend describes, and they prowl at night uttering laughter-like calls that could easily spook anyone hearing them in the darkness. A lone hyena lurking near a village could appear especially imposing given long shadows cast by a large fire at the center of a village. Notably, there's significant precedent to suggest that at least some of these sightings could be explained by hyenas. In one well-documented incident around 1918, a mysterious predator was terrorizing Kenyan villages by eating sheep and goats and cracking open their skulls with its jaw. When locals finally tracked and hunted down the creature responsible, they discovered it was a rabid hyena. Incidents like that could easily have fueled the Nandi bear's grisly reputation. And yeah, sorry I couldn't resist tossing at least one bear pun in this segment, but I'm sure longtime viewers knew that was going to happen. After examining various reports in the 1930s, eminent zoologists at the Natural History Museum in London confidently asserted that all the sightings were simply misidentified animals. Not everyone was satisfied with such mundane explanations, however. To those intrigued by Africa's mysteries, the possibility remained that the Nandi bear was something rare that science had missed. Some proposed that a survivor from the Ice Age lurked in the Kenyan highlands. A prime candidate was an ancient hyena. Paleontologists have found fossils of a massive short-faced hyena, called Pachecrocuta, that once lived in Africa. This Ice Age predator was as tall as a lion and had bone-crushing jaws, almost a ready-made description of the Nandi bear. A few researchers speculated that a relict population of these giant hyenas might have persisted into modern times in remote areas. This could explain the ferocious encounters before finally dying out, according to them. Still, despite alternative explanations, no proof of any relict population of giant hyena have ever been found. On November 9, 2008, a ghost ship called the Taiching 21 was found drifting near the remote Pacific island of Kiribati. The 50-ton boat was partly burned but still afloat, and eerily empty of its 29 crew members, with no distress call ever having been received. On that fateful November day, another fishing boat, crewed by South Korean fishermen, spotted the Tai Ching drifting listlessly. As they drew closer, they realized something was terribly wrong. The Tai Ching 21's exterior was blackened by a recent fire, and silence hung over the vessel. When rescuers finally boarded the ship, the scene was like a nightmare frozen in time. The decks were empty, personal belongings lay abandoned, and every single crew member was missing. Even the ship's lifeboat and 3 life rafts were gone, indicating the crew had likely evacuated in a hurry. The ship's logs, tools, and even food supplies were still in place, as if the crew had simply stepped off into the sea and disappeared. It was as if the Tai Ching 21 had become a modern-day Mary Celeste, a ghost ship drifting with no living soul in sight. Perhaps the most chilling aspect of this case is that nothing seemed amiss in the hours before the crew vanished. The last known communication from Tai Ching 21 was on October 28, 2008, almost 2 weeks before the empty boat was found. In the pre-dawn hours of that day, the Tai Ching 21's captain made a routine satellite phone call to his wife back in Taiwan. He gave no hint of any trouble. It was just a normal check-in from sea. Around the same time, the captain also radioed a nearby sister fishing vessel and arranged to meet in a couple of hours. But when the rendezvous time came around 4 that morning, the Tai Ching never showed up. It had gone radio silent and disappeared into the vast Pacific darkness. The weather in that area was reported as calm on the night of October 28th. There were no distress signals, no Mayday messages. There was absolutely nothing to indicate that anything had gone wrong that night. It was as if whatever befell the Tai Ching 21 occurred so swiftly or stealthily that the crew had no chance to call for help. The only clues would surface later when the empty vessel was found. Signs of a fire on board and the absence of all lifeboats. Once the burnt-out ghost ship was discovered on November 9th, authorities launched an urgent search and rescue mission, clinging to hope that the crew might be adrift on life rafts. The Tai Ching 21's crew consisted of 29 men, the Taiwanese captain, and 28 hired fishermen from China, the Philippines, and Indonesia. The idea that all of them could simply vanish was unthinkable, so international efforts quickly mobilized. Fiji's Rescue Coordination Center took charge, since the mystery was unfolding in their region of the Pacific. They enlisted help from the United States and New Zealand Air Forces, which deployed long-range aircraft to scour the ocean. For days, they flew search and rescue missions over the waves, scanning 21,000 square miles of open ocean north of Fiji in hopes of spotting life rafts or survivors. Naval vessels and fishing boats in the area also kept watch. Officials even dispatched teams to uninhabited atolls and sparsely populated islands north of Kiribati to see if any castaways had come ashore. But as the days turned into weeks, that hope dwindled, and search aircraft found no trace of the Tai Ching 21's crew or their life rafts. By late November 2008, after intensive efforts, rescue teams had to face the grim reality. If the 29 fishermen were adrift out there, they likely wouldn't be found, and if they were, they wouldn't be alive. Given the lack of answers, there's a wide variety of theories about what caused the fire and also what happened to the crew. And surprisingly, even without getting into weird paranormal stuff, some of the potential explanations are highly disturbing. The most straightforward theory is that a sudden onboard emergency forced the crew to abandon ship, after which they tragically perished at sea. The fire damage on the Tai Ching 21 supports this scenario. Perhaps an accidental fire in the engine room or galley broke out in the early hours of October 28th. The crew might have fought the flames until they were overwhelmed, then launched the lifeboat and rafts as a last resort. In the chaos, they may not have had time to radio for help, or the fire could have knocked out communications swiftly. Once adrift on the open Pacific, without a working radio or locator beacon, the crew could have succumbed to exposure or drowned if their rafts capsized. The Pacific Ocean is vast and unforgiving, and drifting survivors can easily vanish among the swells. The official investigations lean toward this explanation, essentially concluding that the crew abandoned a burning ship, but were never found despite the extensive search. It's a grim but plausible narrative, a desperate fight for survival that ended with the ocean claiming 29 lives. Another theory suggests that piracy or poaching was involved. Early on, Taiwanese and Fijian authorities expressed fears that the crew might have been taken by force. The logic was that the weather was calm and no distress call came, so something or someone might have prevented the crew from calling for help. A pirate attack could explain a quick, silent takeover. The pirates might have boarded the vessel at night, forced the crew off into the lifeboats, and then set the ship on fire either deliberately or through a struggle. There's precedent for violent encounters in the high seas fishing industry. Rival fishing boats or poachers have been known to clash over lucrative fishing grounds. If pirates were involved, they could have slain or kidnapped the crew, leaving the Tai Ching 21 as a smoking derelict. This theory is now largely considered debunked, since absolutely no evidence was found for this during the forensic investigation in Taiwan. In the absence of external enemies, some have looked inward at the crew dynamics themselves. The Tai Ching's crew was multicultural and far from home, with one Taiwanese captain leading 28 foreign deckhands on a long and grueling fishing voyage. The harsh reality of high seas fishing can breed desperation. This theory suggests that the crew may have mutinied, slain the captain, and then set the ship ablaze. While this theory may sound far out in the 21st century, it actually happened on Taiwanese ships in 2002 and 2003. That said, in those cases the sailors were near friendly territory, not in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, where taking a lifeboat would be extremely perilous. At present, the most likely theory is that the men had to flee rapidly due to the outbreak of a fire and weren't able to send a distress signal. However, the only thing that can be said for certain is that the 29 men who were out to provide for themselves and their families simply vanished from the face of the earth.